I'm James. I head up product management for our analytics offering. So I'm going to spend some time talking about how some of our customers are leveraging eGain analytics across their operations in a connected way to drive performance improvements and optimize their omnichannel customer engagement. This quote from Gartner really underlines the importance of using data to drive performance and not just mirror it. Contact centers and customer contact has really always been slightly ahead of the game there. I mean, as far back as I can remember, contact centers have always been run on the numbers. But what we're seeing increasingly in our customer base is that people are moving from using data to kind of monitor and diagnose to making it kind of central to pretty much everything they do. And these businesses that have evolved in this way to this kind of elevated performance culture kind of share a number of common attributes. First off, managers and business users have fast, direct access to data. They no longer have to wait for an IT person to put together a new reporting template. They've got access to the right information for analysis in the moment that they need it. Which means that they can spend their time analyzing and not wrangling with and massaging the data, which is really important. So consolidating data into a single place for analysis is really what underpins that. And there's no arguments anymore about whose numbers are right. So there's a single version of the truth across the enterprise. And there's consistency in the KPIs that people use to measure and understand performance. Things like Excel are really good for slicing and dicing and looking at data. But when Excel becomes the enterprise standard for consolidating data, then that's a sign that there's a problem. Another characteristic of these types of organizations is that they enable a culture where it's easy to test a hypothesis and measure if it's successful without like a need for extensive and lengthy preparation beforehand. And that type of freedom enables a culture where you can focus on continuous improvement on an ongoing basis. And the last attribute that we see across these types of businesses that are making data central to what they do is they're now starting to use data and analytics to automate processes within the business. That's those things that they do, the decisions that they make many, many times across each day. We're now seeing those more and more being driven by data, sometimes in an automatic and orchestrated way. So kind of moving to that kind of behavior as an organization, the first thing that we see people do, data obviously, consolidating data is the foundation. So there's a number of questions to ask when considering that type of approach. So first and foremost, what data is needed? What elements of the agent experience and the customer experience need to be measured? And at what level of detail? So often the raw data itself is not enough to be meaningful for analysis, so how does that need to be transformed? And where is that data? So the infrastructure of modern customer contact is increasingly dispersed. Data exists in many silos across the organization, as Ashley mentioned in his presentation earlier. So consolidating that data, bringing it together into a single place for analysis is really important. And we're dealing with different kinds of data these days. So it's not just structured data like call records, but unstructured data like the contents of chats and interactions with virtual assistants. And we need to consider how much data we need. So there's a lot of data generated these days. If we were to consolidate absolutely every single piece of that, sometimes that can be overkill and there can be too much noise. So it's really difficult to extract value from it. Focusing just on the quantity of data at the expense of quality is a recipe for failure. So that data needs to be correct in terms of its accuracy, complete in terms of all the data sources and the relationships between them. Current and up to date so that you can make decisions based on the latest information. Consistent in terms of the definitions and how it's applied across the business. Contextual, so it's easy to understand how that data should be applied and interpreted. And controlled in terms of who has access to it and compliance with things like GDPR. So it's one thing to gather that data together, but we need to put it into the hands of business users in a way that they can get value out of it and easily consume it. So this slide from Gartner kind of neatly describes the 4 analytical capabilities. So descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, and prescriptive. I'm going to take a look at each one of these a little bit in turn. So descriptive analysis is really about what has happened or what's happening right now. It's classic reporting and BI really. So used heavily in operations everywhere, and probably of the 4 capabilities, it's the most widely used. Really here, we're dealing with well-structured, well-defined data. Diagnostic is kind of more focused around the why and the root cause analysis. So this is where we start to kind of dig into the data and do investigative slice and dice to understand what are the reasons for the types of things that we're seeing. So being able to slice and dice across multiple different dimensions is really important here. And predictive is where we start to move from that kind of retrospective view to be more forward-looking. So this is applied to things like forecasting volume for scheduling, or building a model of customer behavior to understand what outcomes might occur from certain scenarios. That spider's web, by the way, is something that came out of our machine learning team. It's actually a model of customer behavior for visitors to a website. So we can use information like that to feed into a model that will help us decide what the best offer to make to a customer is in terms of assistance at any given time during their journey. And the 4th capability, prescriptive, is really more around the guidance. So what should I do? So this is where we're starting to see some really exciting innovations in terms of how we can use historical data to help us decide how we should solve current problems. So how do we operationalize these capabilities? How do we use this data in our day-to-day operations to drive improvements and to make things better? Analytics has an important role to play in terms of understanding what the current situation is, where we can act to make things better, and to measure both the impact of those changes and the value that we get from them. It starts with the capture of information, the consolidation of data. And it's also important to align the KPIs that we use to measure and monitor performance with business goals. So, for example, if cost control and customer experience are the core focus of the business, then we'd want to measure something like first contact resolution, because that impacts both of those things. So we can use analytics to identify opportunities to improve, and then we can intervene. I'm not talking about big changes here. Quite often when you make big changes at once, it's very difficult to measure and understand which things worked and which things didn't work. So often it's better to make a series of small iterative changes, because it's much easier to understand whether they've been effective and whether they've worked. And a lot of small changes can add up to make a big difference. So the best practice here that we definitely see is be experimental, be agile, experiment, test. And when we make those changes, we want to understand, are they effective? Are they working as we expected they would? And are they delivering the value that we expect them to do? And as I said, it's an ongoing progress. So rinse, repeat, carry on. With eGain Analytics, we aim to make it really easy for our customers to make data central to their strategic operations. The analytics product is composed of 4 core modules, so digital analytics, which covers chat, email, interactions with virtual assistants, and so on. knowledge, which covers knowledge when it's used by agents or when it's used by customers in terms of web self-service. Operational analytics, which covers things like voice and IVR. And the newest part of the product is journey analytics, which really stitches those three things together and also brings in the customer experience and the customer perspective. We collect data across all contact center systems into a single hub for analysis. So that's across voice, digital, and other systems like CRM, WFM, quality monitoring, and so on. There's a raft of out-of-the-box content, so reports and dashboards to get people up and running quickly. But what we find is that when people get a little bit of experience with the product, then they soon start to want to extend it and build their own reports and dashboards, etc. So there's business user-focused tools to make that really easy to do. And then beyond that, there is a set of tools and APIs to extend the reach into other systems and bring data in to consolidate things together. There's a rich set of KPIs around the core business areas of focus, such as cost, revenue, customer effort, and satisfaction. And many of these are included in those out-of-the-box reports and dashboards that I mentioned. To give you an idea of the kind of scale of the customers that use this kind of product, here's one of our US customers who is bringing in data from 12 IVRs, 73 switches, 41,000 agents across 11 different virtualized contact centers. They're also bringing in data from their back office. So they're importing data from the operations around 270,000 back office extension phones. So that's quite a lot to consolidate into one platform, and that's just voice. To give you an idea of what that means in terms of data, that's 7.5 million calls a day, and that's across 3 million resources that we report on. So that's the agents, the phones, the queues, the call types, and so on. And that results in around 50 gigabytes of incoming data each week. To put that in perspective, that's like the entire English language text of Wikipedia imported every week. And it supports around 10,000 sessions of analysis a day. So that's 10 different sessions where people log in, run multiple reports, do investigative analysis across the product. So it's central to their strategy and operations. And this is combined with tools to manage and intervene. So as well as the reporting, we have a set of tools to allow people to actually intervene and make changes in the moment. So when they're doing the analysis, they can go straight from that to the management side. As well as tools to manage resources like agents and skill assignments, we've also got the capability to allow our data to be accessed via APIs by downstream systems. So the power of analytics can be used to fuel data-driven interventions to customer journeys. And something that we're looking at more recently is the smart orchestration of those micro loops that's using data to automate decision making. Just to kind of finish up, I'm just going to show a few examples of what this looks like in action. So this is from our Journey Analytics product, and what you're seeing here basically is a user flow. This example is from a kind of retail banking example, and this is the sign-up flow for a loan application process. So on the left-hand side, we've got the start of the process, and on the right-hand side, in the top right, is the successful completion. And the volumes of user journeys are displayed across the arcs. And what we can see is that you probably can't see the numbers, but what we can see is that there's a kind of suboptimal amount of sign-up in this example. And when people are reaching out for online help, which is the node in the middle, it's not necessarily helping people convert and successfully complete their task. And we can see that there's lots of drop-offs on the way at each node. So one way that we can address that is to put in-place guidance in place and use a virtual assistant to actually help people in the middle of the process where they need it. So here we can compare the two. We've replaced the help in the middle with the virtual assistant, so we can see that when people have that in-place assistance through their journeys, it actually increases their conversion rate and allows them to successfully get to the end of the process. mentioned FCR earlier, so FCR is like a key factor in customer effort. So one thing that's useful to understand, this is a dashboard from the product, is where are repeat contacts coming from? And we can look at that at various different levels, but one way to look at that is which agents are the agents that are generating the most repeat contacts. And this example is centered around IVR. So what this is basically stack-ranked IVR journeys that contain a particular event. And the event that we're interested in this case is where the customer's dropped out of the IVR due to an error. So why are people transferring out of the IVR? We can straight away see the top reason for that across all of our journeys. And the top reason for that in this case is where, again, it's the retail banking example, trying to order a statement via the IVR, having trouble with the dates. So again, you can kind of focus your interventions and your changes at the places where they're going to have the most impact. And the last example, so this is something new that we're working on, is smart orchestration. So the concept here is about being able to automatically monitor conditions within the contact center, but detect when there's something that's out of whack, and then act on that. So, for example, consider configuring a monitor to look at whether or not a queue is under stress, and then recommend, based on the resources available, the best way to resolve that. If there are people, if you've got like kind of similar use cases for that kind of technology, then I'd be really interested to hear about them, because this is just something that we're starting to do more and more with. So if you have scenarios where this would be useful to you, then definitely come and talk to us. So that was just a kind of quick overview of how analytics can be used to understand the current situation, identify where to act, and measure the effectiveness of your interventions. Really the best place to see this is up close, so if you haven't been to the demo stations already, then I would really recommend you come and see us there. But thank you very much.